to this week's episode of the Maza's Musings podcast. As some of you listening may know, but many don't, my adventures in higher education actually started with the idea that I would be a French teacher. And to pursue that goal, I enrolled at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia for my freshman year. It was certainly an eye-opening experience for me in a lot of ways. First off, it was my first time significantly away from home. I learned that French literature is the worst. And I was introduced to St. Joseph's basketball and the school's defiant motto, "The Hawk will never die." Obviously, French wasn't for me, but the basketball certainly was, and that has stuck with me. Even after I changed my major and transferred out of the school, I'm still a St. Joe's fan today. And no other team I've found epitomizes that mantra of "the Hawk will never die" than the 2003-2004 team that went undefeated in the regular season, was ranked number 1 in the country, and was within a basket of going to the Final Four. It was the little school that could, led by the little man that could, in Jameer Nelson. So why am I telling you all this? Well, this episode's special guest is Aaron Bracy. Aaron has been covering Big Five hoops in Philadelphia for a long time, and he's the author of a book set to hit shelves next month called A Soaring Season, the incredible, inspiring story of the 2003-04 St. Joseph's Hawks. I'm so excited to talk with Aaron about this book and his impressions of that special season. Plus, we're going to be talking about some current basketball affairs. But of course, before we get into all of that, we'll kick off this episode with yet another edition of Meghan's Joke of the Week.
What's a ghost's favorite thing in school?
I don't know. What is a ghost's favorite thing in school?
Books.
That's a good one. All right. And of course, for every episode that isn't Disney specific, we have to get our Disney fix with our Maza's Mickey Minute. This week's minute will be keeping with the sports theme, and it also ties into our main topic because one of the teams in this week's Super Bowl is from Philadelphia.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra!
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, because this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And here we go!
Well, if you're a sports fan, you may be wondering how you can catch the big game if you're down at Walt Disney World this weekend. Certainly, if you're at the parks, you're probably not looking to sit down and watch the game, though maybe you are. If you're a Kansas City fan or a Philadelphia fan, maybe you are that into it that that's something you're going to do. But for the casual fan, they still want to maybe see part of the game, maybe watch the whole game. Either way, whatever you'd like. I decided to do a little bit of research into where you might be able to catch the game. Well, I came across this list that was prepared by Diz Mornings, which can be found at diztripsandmore.com. Now, what's Diz Mornings? Well, it's a team of Disney folks, many of whom you've probably heard of before. If you've listened to the Hyperion Adventures podcast, you've heard Tom and Michelle talk about their great friend Nate, who helps them with their travel planning. He is part of the Diz Morning team, as are Justin Monorail, Steffers, and Landon the Daz Doan, who are part of the Monday Morning Monorail podcast. Now, whether it's Hyperion Adventures or the Monday Morning Monorail, both great podcasts. I encourage you to listen. But that's not what this is about. What this is about is finding the places where you can watch the game. So this list that they put together starts pretty obviously, and it's in your room. The game is on Fox. Now, this list that they put together was more talking about sports in general, but I'm making it specific to the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is on Fox. So you can use the TV in your room and get the game. If you prefer to use a Fire Stick or a Roku or something like that, you can, but the Diz Mornings team points out that the Disney Wi-Fi can be unpredictable. You could also cast it from your device to the smart TV in the room. Disney has several resorts that are now equipped with these smart TVs. All-Star Movies is one of them. Animal Kingdom Lodge, Contemporary, Coronado Springs, Polynesian Village, Port Orleans Resort, both the French Quarter and Riverside, the Riviera Resort, Saratoga Springs, Wilderness Lodge, and the Yacht and Beach Club resorts. So outside of your room, they suggest going to a hotel lounge. They do mention that the hotel lounges with TVs, the TVs tend to be smaller, so that's something to keep in mind. But their top picks are Geyser Point at Wilderness Lodge, which I can attest is a great place to grab a drink, and also they're equipped with some good TVs. There's almost always a game on when we stay there. The other one is Steakhouse 71 Lounge at the Contemporary. Now, outside of that, if you're looking for like the true sports bar vibe, you're basically going to have to go to Disney Springs. They note that there used to be something on more on property when Disney's Boardwalk had the Espian Club, but that's closed now. So basically, two spots that are the most sports bar-ish would be Splitsville or CityWorks. So those are the ones that they suggest. And they also, like I said, are you really going to be at the parks paying all that money to watch the game? Probably not. So they don't really go into a lot of detail about where you can go to watch the games in the park. There really aren't a lot of places anyway. Really, if you're looking for that immersive Disney experience, I wouldn't think that you're looking for a place that has a TV. So anyway, I'm getting a little off track here, but those are the places that Diz Mornings suggests you should look for the big game. And you can check out the list for yourself and some other cool stuff that they have at DizTripsandMore.com. Now, as far as I'm concerned, whether you're trying to sort out where you're going to watch the big game, or whether you're trying to sort out how to do all this lightning lane stuff, the use of an agent is just totally invaluable. And I would suggest no one else but We Do Travel Right, because We Do Travel Right just has that high concierge level service. You get the one-on-one attention of an agent. You have resources like seminars and study halls where you can learn the ins and outs of all of these different things that you're using. They also have team members like the dining team that can help you secure those hard to get reservations for your meals. They just have so many things that just take the stress of the trip away so that you can just focus on having fun. And the best part is the services are free. Yeah, you're not paying anything extra to use We Do Travel Right. We Do Travel Right is paid by Disney or Universal or the cruise lines or all-inclusive resorts. Why? Because those places already build the use of an agent into their pricing. So you're paying for it whether you use it or not. So it only makes sense to use it. So if you want to get your free, obligation-free quote, go to wedotravelright.com/Maza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA. and get your next magical vacation started today.
Now I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
All right, so now that we have had a laugh and we figured out where we're going to watch the Super Bowl while we're at Disney, let's get into our main topic of the week, which is my conversation with Aaron Bracy. All right, so I have the pleasure of being joined by Aaron Bracy, who, among many other things, is the author of A Soaring Season, the incredible, inspiring story of the 2003-2004 St. Joseph's Hawks, which is going to be coming out March 1st, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a book all about that incredible season, which ended up with a number one ranking, undefeated regular season, and a tournament run that I don't think anybody would have, even the best St. Joe's fan would have never seen that coming, I don't think. So, Aaron, thank you for joining us. And this is the time when usually I open it up to you to introduce yourself and let people get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, Chris, thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Really happy and excited to talk to you today. And just by way of background, I'm a St. Joseph's graduate. I graduated there in 1998. And since then, I've been a sports writer in Philadelphia for the last almost 30 years, a little short of 30. Covered just about everything, but always been a dream of mine to write a book. And I could kind of take it from here, or if you have more questions, but that's a little bit of the background. And I'm sure we'll jump off from here.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of my background too. We didn't have a lot of time to chat beforehand, but we were talking before hitting record that I attended St. Joe's for a year back at Jameer Nelson's freshman year. So that's part of my connection with St. Joe's specifically. I just remained a fan after that because I was just such a fan of the St. Joe's basketball culture, and the Philadelphia college basketball culture in and of itself was just so great. I'm also here in Springfield, Massachusetts, which of course is the birthplace of basketball, and we have the Basketball Hall of Fame here. I grew up as a kid surrounded by UMass fans, and during the refuse to lose years, and also Jim Brennan, the original Hawk, is from Hamden, which is a suburb of Springfield. So there are some other connections to the basketball world and to the St. Joe's world here, even in Western Massachusetts. So you mentioned that it was always a dream of yours to write a book. What was the inspiration that led you down this road to this book and to this story about this team?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of things happened to kind of make this all come together. And just to back up, I mentioned it's always been a dream of mine. I grew up reading Bill Lyon in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the late great columnist in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I always wanted, that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Bill Lyon. I wanted to write a column like Bill Lyon. And that was kind of my dream. So I took it from there. I went to St. Joe's. I wrote for the student newspaper. I broadcast on the student radio station. And from there, I started working in sports journalism, worked for several newspapers, the Trenton Times, the Trentonian, the Mainline Times, Courier Post. Ultimately, I went into teaching, into education, but I still did journalism on the side as a freelancer for the Associated Press. So this is all background, just to fast forward. In 2010, I started a website called philahoops.com, which covered the Big Five. As you, I love the Big Five, and I just love journalism. I wanted to keep my hand in it, but it became too much to try and do that. I have 3 kids. I was working full time. It just became too much. So I stopped doing that in about 2013 or 14. But in 2023, my situation changed. I'm working for an educational publishing company, working from home. My kids are a little older, so I have a little bit more time. And I was watching Villanova play Penn at the Palestra on TV. And Mike Jensen, the great columnist from the Philadelphia Inquirer, it was his last game, so he was retiring. And so I was like, well, there's going to be really fewer people covering the Big Five, and I have a little more time, and I miss it. So that night, I literally ran upstairs, and I started big5hoops.com. And this was November 2023. And shortly after that, Chris, I started thinking about, this is the 20th anniversary of the St. Joseph's Hawks 2003-04 team. I'm like, I'd love to write a feature story for big5hoops.com about that team. And then I was like, wait a minute, maybe this is the book that I always wanted to write. And just to take you back, a couple things that happened in my life personally, and not to sound morbid, but my dad and my stepfather both died within 9 months of each other in the previous year. And it got me thinking, like, life is precious. I really want to think about what can I do that I always wanted to do. And writing a book was one of them. Also, I had been transferred from social studies to language arts in my job in educational publishing. And I was literally, my job was to read books for our curriculum. So I was reading all these great books. Now they were geared toward young, high school and middle school students, but the writing was really good. And I've always been a big reader, Chris. So I was reading these books, and a few other things happened, and it just felt like it was a godsend. And I just put my head down and I was like, I'm going to try and write this book about this team. No one had written a book. It was a great story, and I wanted to learn more. And just started interview after interview, research after research. And lo and behold, a year later, we had a book.
Well, it took a year, like all of this, it seems like it was kind of a whirlwind. It seems like a lot of interviews, a lot of work, and fact finding, fact checking, all in a year. That's really impressive. So I gotta say, I'm impressed. Along the way, I'd imagine you had the opportunity to kind of dive into a lot of the stories inside this team, the things that were not evident to people who were looking at box scores, who watched the games. This was a really unique kind of team in that a lot of times you'll find the superstars, and Jameer Nelson was not necessarily a superstar. He wasn't highly recruited. Delonte West wasn't someone who was highly recruited. It just seemed like they had the right cast of characters to make something special happen. So, were there any particular stories that over this time that really stuck out to you as, wow, this was something that really epitomizes what this team was all about?
That's a great question, Chris. Really, you set it up perfectly, and you stated really well what made that team successful in many ways. And there were so many things that I could go into, and that I hope readers will find out. Just to touch on some things on the surface. First of all, as you mentioned, these players were not highly recruited. Jameer Nelson was the star of the team, but Jameer Nelson was not recruited by any of the so-called power conference teams. His recruiting came down to UMass, St. Joseph's, and Temple. Delonte West was not recruited by anyone. He was a mid-major recruit. St. Joseph's, Manhattan, Siena, and Towson were recruiting Delonte West. And then the other guys were in many cases, barely Division I recruits. St. Joseph's was not their first choice. Tyrone Barley wanted to go to Seton Hall. Chet Stakaitis wanted to go to Stanford. Pat Carroll was his brother Matt was the big recruit in the family. Matt went to Notre Dame. Pat was, he was a lower level Division I prospect. So first of all, you start there. You have all these guys who are under recruited. Barely Division I prospects in many cases. But what made this team's, and also I should mention that they were playing in a facility, the field house, as you know, when you were there, it was not even as modern as many high school gyms. They were working out in the weight room that was, like, Chris, when you were there as a freshman, you could have gone into the weight room and you would have been working out right next to Jameer Nelson. And if you were bench pressing, Jameer had to wait for you. So it was a really unique story in that way, that you had these under-recruited players playing in this facility that was, bare bones, not even as modern as many high schools. The program itself was underfunded. They're getting by on a shoestring budget when compared to the teams to which they were competing. And yet somehow they managed to come together and go 27-0 in the regular season, become the number one team in the country, and become the envy, quite frankly, of the blue bloods of the sport, the Kentuckys and the Dukes. They were a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. And really the key to their success, and you mentioned it, but it was the way that this team came together and the way that they worked. And I don't want to give away all of what's in the book, but you're going to find out in the book that these guys worked in a way that you wouldn't believe, number one. Number two, they came together and played their roles in a way that made this truly a team. And the sum was greater than the parts. And when you took all the parts apart, it wasn't all that impressive of a team. Like there weren't any All-American candidates outside of Jameer and Delonte, and you have 2 first-round NBA picks. So let's be clear, they were very talented at the top. But after that, you didn't have anyone else that really would have been considered any like an All-American type player or even an All-League type player, quite frankly. But they were able to come together, put all their egos aside, and come together as a team in a way that made them basically unbeatable. And I wanted to find out why. And I tried to do that in the book by talking to so many people. And I think readers are going to find out really what made that team tick and what really made that team successful. And I think a lot of it is the role clarity, the hard work, the togetherness, the teamwork, the leadership, and many other factors that I think people will learn about in the book.
It's funny you were talking about seeing the players in the weight room and things like that. It's interesting too, though, especially with the St. Joe's community being fairly small in terms of college campuses and things like that. I feel like that was possibly an opportunity for the rest of the university to kind of feel like these guys were a little bit more a part of them, like it wasn't one of these things where you necessarily had these guys that were on a pedestal or removed from the rest of the population, so to speak. These were guys who were among the people that were coming to cheer for them on a nightly basis. So even that, in a way, is a bit unique compared to some other programs, especially ones that reach that level of success.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris. And I talked to Father Timothy Lannon, who was the president of the university at the time, and he spoke a lot about what you just said. And I'd like to leave kind of his comments to readers, but much of what you said is in the book. And also, you mentioned small school. I mean, the school enrolled 3,850 students at the time, and yet for their first game at Madison Square Garden, they sold 4,100 tickets just through the school, more than the entire enrollment of the school, which was a record for the Coaches vs. Cancer Classic when they played Madison. They played at Madison Square Garden against Gonzaga in that first game. And so this was a Coaches vs. Cancer Classic that previously had Duke and UConn, all these big schools, and little St. Joe's sold more tickets than these huge state schools. And the university just got behind that team in a way that I think has been in many ways unmatched. I didn't do a comparison of every college basketball team in history to say, this team or that team, but it got behind St. Joe's in a way that was really special. And not just the school, but the entire city of Philadelphia got behind that team as the run kept going on and they kept winning and winning. By March, they were the number one story in Philadelphia, not just in college basketball, but in Philadelphia sports. And also they were the number one story in the country in college basketball, not just the number one ranked team. And they did it, as I mentioned, with an enrollment of 3,850 students. And it was just really a special thing. And I don't think you're ever going to see that happen again.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember, the Sports Illustrated with Jameer Nelson on the cover. I think it was the little man from the little school that's beating everybody. I mean, that, it epitomized really the level of success that, on a much broader scale that they had. It was a simple cover. It didn't It was just Jameer with basketball and a statement. And that pretty much, summed up, this team was not about frills. It was not, and it wasn't about one player. Jameer was on the cover, but it was about, this is what we are. We're a basketball team who is going to come in here and we are going to beat you tonight. And I think that something that leads to that culture, of course, is the players buying in, but the message of the coach. And Phil Martelli in and of himself is a very unique individual. Not giving away anything in the book, but just from your observations of Phil, what makes him such a unique character that people gravitate to him and really worked with this group of players?
It's a great question. And Phil Martelli wanted to be the St. Joseph's head coach from the time he was in 8th grade. That was the only job he ever wanted. He grew up in Southwest Philadelphia, taking trolley rides to the Palestra. He fell in love with Big Five basketball. But unlike many kids who wanted to be like the players on the court, Phil wanted to be like the coach on the sideline. He wanted to be Jack McKinney or Jack Ramsey. And it was his dream job. And yet he had been an assistant coach at St. Joseph's for 10 years, had been overlooked when the position came open after Jim Boyle resigned in the late 80s. John Griffin took over. Martelli did stay on the staff. But he, much like the players, was looking to prove himself. I mean, he was overlooked for the only job he ever wanted. He finally got the chance when he was 41 years old. And the thing that made Phil, in many ways, perfect for that team was that I think in the way that he recruited the team was one thing. And I think you're going to learn a lot more in the book. But it was the recruitment. There were a lot of things about Jameer, which you're going to love reading about and learning about. There were things about practices, which you're going to love reading about and learning about. His leadership. So just kind of speaking on surface level, there's going to be much more detail in the book about your question. It's a great question. What made him successful? And also there was the media aspect. The attention on St. Joe's got very great. And for some that might've been a challenge, but Phil Martelli has always been, and to this day, very comfortable in the spotlight. And the media attention was something that he handled extremely well. And in some ways helped to alleviate some of the pressure off the players because he was out in front of that and was always comfortable in the spotlight, always comfortable in the media. And as big as it got, it was never too big for Phil Martelli. And I think that was part of why that team was able to be a success.
Now, getting back to the writing of the book, one of the things that I've heard is maybe sometimes the hardest part is, okay, you've written the book. Now it's like time to sell the book. Once you had it all on paper, what was the biggest challenge for you? I mean, I'd imagine the editing process, trying to decide what you're going to leave in, what you're going to leave out, and how you're going to present this book to the public once it's ready. Talk a little bit about how you approached first taking all of the information that you had and organizing it, and then once that's done, people have got to buy it. So,
yeah,
that's the second part.
Great points, Chris. And the hardest part, quite honestly, one of the hardest parts was taking all the information. I did 90 interviews. I interviewed 90 people, more than 100 interviews with 90 people. So, and I had hours and hours and hours of transcribing. So I had all these interviews. I had done all this research, just exhaustive research, everything I could read, everything I could find. So I had all this information and it was like, what do I do with it? So the way I approached it was I looked at it like I was going to kind of put a puzzle together. And I took all this information, and as if I were doing a jigsaw puzzle, I started putting them into these little different piles. And the piles ended up becoming the chapters to the book. And once I got that done, it felt a little bit easier. I had written an outline of the book by hand of what I thought the chapters could look like. And then once I sort of put these in the buckets, I was able to start going one by one through the chapters And what I would do is I would handwrite I would go through all my information, all my interviews. I would handwrite an outline for that particular chapter. And then I would start writing. And believe it or not, the writing process, I'm not going to say it was easy by any means, but in some respects, the actual writing was sort of the breeziest of this process, because the editing after the writing was a challenge. And I've been an editor for a long time, and it's a little bit easier in many cases to edit other people's work than your own. So what I would do is I would write each chapter, I would record it into my phone, and I would take the chapter on a walk and I would listen to it. As I walked, I would make edits into my phone, just talking into my phone. I would take it back and I would rewrite it or revise it. And then I would leave it on the kitchen counter for my wife. My wife read every word. She's not like a huge sports fan, which is important, because I didn't want the book to be too heavy into sports. And I want the book to be a human interest story. And I want people who maybe aren't sports fans to be interested and engaged in it. And it was important to me. So my wife would read it back. She would make suggestions, and then I would kind of take it from there. So then once I finally submitted the manuscript, I was pretty happy with it. I submitted it to the publisher. They edited it. They had a copy editor go through it, and then they sent it back to me for final edits, thoughts. And that part was really challenging, because I knew that whatever I submitted, like, it wasn't like I could get it back and do it over. You know what I mean? So it was challenging knowing that there was a finality that was somewhat terrifying, to be honest. And so I really took my time going through it. I ended up reading the manuscript probably 5 times, certainly 4, maybe 5 times. Each time I got it back. By the end, I was like, please don't send me this back. Please don't send it to me. I just wanted to get out there. And so that was probably the most painstaking of the process, was the editing, and just the quite frankly, just the hours. I would stay up every night, Chris, until I couldn't stay up anymore. Like I would literally be falling asleep at my desk, and then I would wake up quite often, like 3 or 4 in the morning, to get started again. So there were a lot of late nights, a lot of really early mornings, a lot of long weekends, and I had a very tight deadline, because I needed to get it to the publisher by the end of August 2024 to have it out by March 1st, 2025. And I set my personal deadline 2 weeks earlier so that I would make sure I gave myself some wiggle room. I ended up submitting it around August 4th, so even earlier than I wanted, because if the book was delayed, I didn't want it to be because I missed any deadlines. So it was a really exciting, it was exhaustive, but it was really exciting, like the adrenaline of every day. And even now, like, as you mentioned, trying to, promote it, get, do events. That's also taken a lot of my time. But it's, when you're working on something that you love, that you've always wanted to do, it's a dream. It's like, it's tiring, but it's not taking your energy out in the same way that maybe if you weren't doing something you were passionate about would.
Well, the book is coming out March 1st. Where are people going to be able to get it?
Yeah, so thank you for that. It'll be available wherever books are sold beginning March 1st, Chris. You can pre-order a copy now in various places, including on my website, big5hoops.com. I have a homepage, big5hoops.com/a soaring season. It's also available on Amazon, on Brookline Books. Brookline is the publisher, so you can purchase it, pre-order it at any of those spots. I'm really excited. I just found out today, actually. I haven't put this out publicly. It's the first I've told, but the book is already headed to reprint, which means that the pre-order sales have been good enough for them to warrant printing more books. So please keep the pre-orders coming. That's really important to selling the book. And they should start rolling out here in late February is my expectation for people who've pre-ordered. I would think they would get their copy sometime in late February, although I don't want to guarantee that because of, the vagaries of shipping. But definitely March 1st is the expectation that you should be able to walk into your local bookstore and purchase it. Or if you purchase it online, it should ship out the next day, basically. So really excited, super excited. I've got to also have a bunch of events coming up for anyone in the Delaware Valley who'd like to hear some more about the book, some background. I'm going to have some guest speakers at those events as well. And there's a link on my website, big5hoops.com/events, where you can find out more. So thankful for everyone who's supported me, and just I excited doesn't really capture the word, Chris.
Well, obviously a lot has happened since the subject of this book. There's been 20 plus years of teams. Looking at this year's St. Joe's team, obviously I'm watching from a distance. ESPN Plus has become my new best friend. It's great that I'm actually able to watch games on TV. A lot of times I was, listening to what I could catch of broadcasts, on web radio, or, following along on Twitter to you or whoever else was was throwing tweets out there. But this year's team seems hard to get your arms around. It seems like this is a talented group that just doesn't seem to have any consistency from night to night. I mean, you even look at the difference of the two Loyola games, and it's a stark difference. And so, what's your impression of this team, and why haven't they really been able to find any traction?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. And you set it up perfectly. And I think the word is consistency that you mentioned. And that's been the biggest challenge, or the biggest thing holding this team back. They want to play beyond the 3-point line. They want to shoot and make threes. And it looked like they had the players to do that, but they just have not been hitting at a consistent level. In fact, it's been pretty clear. I have the stats here and the percentages. I'm not going to go deep into percentages, but the basics are that when they hit the three, generally they have a chance to win. And when they don't hit the three, generally they have a chance to lose. And it sounds simple, but it's the reality. And they have not been able to come up with another way when their threes haven't been falling. They actually did it against Duquesne last Wednesday. I was there at Hagan Arena. I want to say they missed 16 of 19 threes, but they got to the free throw line 35 times, which was a season high. They made, I think, 29 or 26 free throws, which was also a season high. And I think that was a good style for them. And I think it's something that down the stretch here, if they can adjust to, maybe they could do that a little more. But I think they just have not been hitting 3-pointers in a way that I think they need to in the style that they play. And I think it doesn't really go much deeper than that. I mean, they've shown they can play with great teams. They beat Texas Tech. They crushed Virginia Tech. Not that Virginia Tech's a great team. They beat Villanova, but then it's like head scratching. They lost at home to Central Connecticut and Princeton. They lost to Charleston at home. You mentioned Loyola Chicago. They blew them out of the water at Hagan. They go on the road and they lose there. They no contest at Dayton. Not that Dayton's an easy place to play. But it's just been so up and down. Look good at Davidson. So I need for them to be the team that I thought they could be, which was an NCAA tournament team. Quite frankly, they were picked to finish third in the preseason, the Atlantic 10, but they just have not played a consistent brand of basketball to really warrant thinking they're anything other than what they are, which is basically more or less an average Atlantic 10 team right now. They still have, I believe, 9 games left. Still plenty of time to get things rolling. Heading into Washington, D.C. Ultimately, they pretty much were always going to need to win the Atlantic 10 tournament after their non-conference schedule with those home losses that I mentioned. But they have a lot of work to do. And it seems like it's going to be, we just need to keep shooting and we need to find our form. And at this point, that has not happened at the consistent level that you need it to happen for them to be a top tier Atlantic 10 team.
Yeah. And it's funny. It feels like, and I haven't checked the standings in the past few days, but it feels like there are a couple teams at the top and then there's a real log jam right there in the middle. So it feels, you look at the standings, especially the conference standings, and it's just like, still a shot at a decent seed here, but then you look at what's happening on the court, it doesn't necessarily correlate. Is there an issue league wide with, I don't want to say with quality, but with just no one being able to distinguish themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think your point is really well taken. The league is the teams are very comparable, other than maybe VCU at the top. Now, George Mason is atop the stand. I have not seen George Mason in person yet, so I only can look at their record. I would like to see them before I commit to them being a top tier league team. I know right now on paper they are, but I would like to see more. I've seen VCU, not just this year, but I saw last year Max Shulgin. He's excellent. St. Louis has been playing better. But other than maybe a St. Louis or a VCU and perhaps a George Mason, Dayton's even slipped. But the teams they're kind of all beating themselves up. I think there are a bunch of, I would like to say there are a bunch of very good teams, not great teams, but very good teams. And they're all just they all have each other's number. And there aren't really any really bad teams. Even Fordham, which is the lowest in the league, has shown they can win some games. In the past, I think the Atlantic 10 has had 2 or 3 or 4 bottom dwellers that really were more or less easy wins. I don't think any team in the league this year is an easy win. And I think that's part of what's playing into it. I don't think that the teams are necessarily great teams, but I think there are a lot of very good teams. St. Joe's kind of being in that sort of middle of the pack. I think I want to say they're in like a 4 or 5 way tie for 8th place at maybe like 4 and 5. I have the standings here, but I don't want to dive too deep into the numbers. I just, so it's going to come down to getting hot. And so that's what's really like holding me back. Like, I think they have the talent to be a higher seed. Like, I think they could even be a top 4 seed and get a double bye, like you mentioned. But I haven't seen them play consistently enough to say, okay, they can win 3 games in a row, which is what you need to do to win the Atlantic 10 tournament. They just haven't played that way for me to say, okay, they can do that. Again, I still think there's time to do that. I think most of all, they need to prove it to themselves that they can win 3 games in a row at a time where everything's on the line. And until they do that, I'm not convinced that they are a team that can win the Atlantic 10 tournament.
Well, speaking of the Atlantic 10 in the tournament, one of the, obviously being in Western Massachusetts, one of the things that has also connected me to the A10 is back when they used to have like those opening rounds at campus sites. I happened to cover a few games for visiting papers. So I've gotten to experience on a little bit different level the A10 tournament and UMass's place in the A10. And now UMass is obviously leaving the A10 for the MAC, which is very much a football decision, it seems, more than anything. And I was curious as to an outsider's point of view, because the point of view here has not necessarily been very positive. It seems, truthfully, a lot of people that I've talked to, it feels like they're chasing something with this football thing that doesn't seem like it's ever going to yield any success that they seem to be looking for, and in the process they're forfeiting a lot of tradition and basketball history, and a place in a league that still has a certain cachet among the basketball community.
Yeah, it's a sad reality of college sports today that football is driving the bus. And it's kind of always been that way, but it's even more so now with the way the money is structured and the way the conferences are going. And I'm not close enough to UMass to know what it is, whether it's a good or bad decision. But obviously I would think it's driven by money. Sort of, we've seen that here in Philly with Temple. Same thing. They left the Atlantic 10 for the American, for football. And as someone who has been closely watching the Atlantic 10 for a long time, both as a reporter, as a student reporter, before that as just a fan, I love those UMass teams of the 90s. That the Temple UMass rivalry was awesome. It's sad. It's really sad. And it's sad that the traditions, and it's not just UMass. I mean, you look, it's all around college sports. So far from just UMass, but it's sad that tradition and rivalry and history is just bypassed because of money. And I understand. I get it. Like college athletics and college higher education is a business. Like they have a bottom line. Like I don't blame them for having to make ends meet. But I do think you take a chance of sacrificing long-term financial success, both in terms of what alumni will give, the opportunity to make the NCAA tournament in the league that you are in for a short-term gain. Now, in UMass's case, they have not had success in the Atlantic 10 like a Temple. UMass has just made, I think, one NCAA tournament since that great 90s team of John Calipari. So I don't think leaving the Atlantic 10 is this great loss for them. It's a loss for Atlantic 10 fans, for people who follow the Atlantic 10. I am sad for them to leave, but they have not been a successful top-tier NCAA tournament Atlantic 10 team. Perhaps maybe going to the MAC is going to help them. I'm not close enough to UMass to know. I would personally like to see UMass and Temple in the Atlantic 10 because of the history and tradition. For Temple's standpoint, they were a regular NCAA tournament team in the Atlantic 10 year in and year out. Since leaving the Atlantic 10 in 2013, they've made just 2 NCAA tournaments, Chris. So it's had an impact on them, and it hasn't just been the conference. John Chaney retired. They had Fran Dunphy came in. He made the NCAA tournament. Then there was coaching change with Aaron McKee. Now they're second year under Adam Fisher, who seems to have the program headed back in the right direction. But I think for Temple, I think it's clearly had a negative impact on the basketball program. I would think it would similarly have one for UMass, although UMass has not had the success in the Atlantic 10. So perhaps it could be a positive. But as an Atlantic 10 follower, for me, it's sad.
Yeah, I mean, if UMass being a charter member, especially, it's a blow to the league. You know, as you mentioned, they haven't had the same level of success as some other teams, but that it leaves a hole. And I remember, you know, when Temple left, you know, I mean, I must have had seen the Calipari Chaney things circulating over and over again, you know, and those are the kinds of things that I mean, maybe we're clinging to nostalgia a little too much, but those are the things that you lose. And I guess there's some worry that eventually you'll turn around and the league's either worst case not going to exist or not going to look like, you know, you think it should, or, you know. So yeah, and now I love my college football too. But I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I don't have to worry about the conference thing, and you don't have to worry about, you know, my team's conference poaching any teams. So, but yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me tonight. Again, if you wanted to just let people know where they can find you on the social medias, on the internet, where they can find your book, fire away.
Yeah, first of all, I just would like to thank you for the opportunity. It was a great conversation, and really enjoyed your questions, and it was really fun to talk to you, Chris, and wish you all the success with your podcast and everything you're doing with Maza Musings. And yeah, you can find the book at big5hoops.com/A Soaring Season, wherever books are sold. Again, the title of the book is A Soaring Season, the incredible, inspiring story of the 2003-04 St. Joseph's Hawks. You can also purchase that at Brookline Books, which is the publisher. And beginning March 1st, 2025, you can walk into your local bookstore, and hopefully they'll have it front and center on their bookshelf. If not, you know, maybe you could ask for it, tell them, hey, it should be out front. And I really would love to hear everyone's feedback, Chris, yours and everyone. You can find me on social media at Aaron_Bracy on X, Instagram, and Threads, and Aaron Bracy on Blue Sky. the Bracy Sports Media Facebook page and YouTube page. You can find me there, and I would love to hear what you think, and would love if you do get it, if you could share it out with your followers and help get the word out, or your friends if you're not on social media. I would be really grateful and thankful for that in advance.
No, well, I'm very much looking forward to reading this book. I think that it's going to have, from what I've read, it's going to have a ton of information that maybe you didn't get from necessarily watching this team play on a night in and night out basis. And that's what, as you said, it's a human interest story. This is a collection of people and a compelling story. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and I'll certainly be sharing it, and I'll be in touch with heaps of praise, I'm sure.
Well, hopefully the readers will decide. I definitely am looking forward to the feedback, and would love to come back on, Chris, anytime and talk about it. And to your point, I would just like to say that was one of my goals with the book, was to try and bring as many perspectives into the story, because obviously we know the story kind of from the St. Joe's perspective, but I wanted to get different voices involved, because I wanted to find out so many different details. And I've already mentioned this to Phil Martelli. I said, there's some things that you have no idea about. Like, you have no idea of the impact and some of the stories. And so, I'm really looking forward to everyone kind of learning the different angles and the different perspectives of it.
Oh, and one thing that I meant to say earlier is Joe Lunardi did the foreword for you. And Joe obviously is, a wealth of St. Joe's and general, college basketball knowledge. And he also just seems like, I've never met him admittedly, but he just seems like genuinely one of the nicest people you could ever meet.
Well, Joe is awesome. I would like to mention that if I have a second, because I've known Joe Lunardi for a long time. I was the statistician as a student, as an undergraduate, for Joe and Ken Krasalvik for the radio broadcast. So I've known Joe long before he's become Mr. Bracketology star. And it's so funny because like last year at the A10 tournament in Brooklyn, I was just talking to Joe, like I always have. He's just a regular guy. And Joe walked away, and there were all these student interns were like, "That's Joe Lunardi from ESPN." But you mentioned the forward, and I would just like to say, people see Joe Lunardi on TV and the bracketologist, but Joe is a really, really good writer. And he was a longtime public relations person at St. Joseph's, and also wrote for Adidas Blue Ribbon College Yearbook and the Delaware County Times. And when I read his forward, I was just blown away. His forward is awesome, and it just leads perfectly into the story. Like when I say perfectly, and you'll read it, you can determine and decide. But like he wrote this forward, I sent Joe just a little bit of the story, like I sent him the prologue, so he had a feel for what I was writing. But that was all he's read. He hasn't read any more than the prologue, but he set the story up perfectly. And I'm just so thankful and grateful for him writing the forward. Regardless of what he wrote, I mean, I was thankful, but the forward is really, really good. And it just sets up the story, I think, for me perfectly. And again, I'm kind of biased, but you guys will decide, Chris, and readers will decide what they think. But really, really grateful for Joe's contribution.
All right. Well, thank you once again for joining me. I can't wait to read the book. Everybody who's listening, be on the lookout for it. You can obviously pre-order it or be on the lookout for it at your local bookstores March 1st. Thanks again.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. I hope that you guys enjoyed that episode as much as I did. This was a blast. I had such a great time talking about this team. It was a great little walk down memory lane for me, and I think for him as well. And, we just got a little nugget of some of the things that are going to be in this book, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. Be on the lookout for a Soaring season. It sounds like it's going to be a terrific book. And like I said, I cannot wait to read it. If you enjoyed this episode as well, the best thing that you can do is tell your friends. Word of mouth is the number one way that we get that we get more listeners. But what also helps is leaving a rating or a review. Whatever podcatcher you use, whether it's Good Pods, which you can do a thumbs up for individual episodes and even comment on individual episodes. Spotify has their star system and also allows you to comment, or wherever Apple Podcasts, whatever you use. All of that stuff helps more people find us because it bumps us up in whatever the algorithms are that make it easier for people to find this podcast. You can also connect with us on social media and interact with us that way. We are at Maza's Musings Podcast on Facebook. We're at Maza's Musings Pod on Threads, Instagram, and Twitter. We are also on TikTok at Maza's Musings Podcast, and we're on Blue Sky. You can find all this information, plus there's also a direct contact form on our website, which is mazasmusings.wordpress.com. Also, while you're on the website, why don't you sign up for our newsletter, and you will get all kinds of information on what's coming up with the podcast, what you might have missed in a past episode. We also will shout out other podcasts that we have enjoyed listening to, or if there's going to be a guest spot or something like that, which has happened. I actually just recently was on the Hyperion Adventures podcast, and thank you, Tom and Michelle, for that, because that was a ton of fun. So go listen to that episode and then listen to all of Tom and Michelle's other episodes because they're great. Lost my train of thought there for a second. But anyway, the newsletter will come out every week, and you'll have the opportunity to find out all this kind of stuff. You can also, on the website, if you're looking to do a little bit something extra in terms of supporting the podcast, you can buy us a blue milk. There's a icon right there on the website, and that's a obligation-free way to help us out with some of the little costs that are associated with this podcast. And any support in any form is much appreciated. Like I said, thank you everybody for listening. This was a great episode. We've got some exciting episodes coming up. Next week, we're going to have the guys from Big T, Little T, which is a Star Wars podcast. They'll be coming on to kind of review with me now that the dust has settled a little bit, the Skeleton Crew. I love this show. I get the impression that they did as well. We're both part of Neil Nation. So, I'm looking forward to that one. We'll also have, while me, Eileen, and Meghan are on vacation at Walt Disney World, we'll have our Disney Dudes episode where I got together with some other Disney guys who just love being Disney adults. It's a great episode, even if you're not a big Disney fan, to kind of see some different perspectives from some different people from different areas of the country and different walks of life. Really a fun episode. So that's some of the stuff we have coming up. And this is all stuff that you can get through the newsletter or by checking our social media. However you decide to connect with us, we appreciate it all. And as always, hope you have a great weekend and a great week.